The chest sat in the center of the dark courtyard, the flickering torchlight casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. Around it, masked figures stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the object before them. The air was thick with tension, anticipation building with each passing second. What they had come for wasn't gold or jewels. It was the unraveling of everything they had once sworn to protect. The moment of truth had arrived, and the choices they made now would echo throughout history, changing everything they had believed in. But in this sacred space, beneath the weight of their oaths, betrayal was about to be born. The night was cold and shrouded in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind whispered through the trees. A full moon hung low in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows on the stone walls of the ancient abbey. The flickering glow of torchlight illuminated the cloaked figures standing in a tight circle at the center of the courtyard. Each man was masked, his identity hidden, as they gathered around a single object, a chest, ornate and old, resting on the cold stone floor. The air was thick with anticipation and a sense of danger that felt almost tangible. But it wasn't just the chest that held their attention. It was what was about to happen next. They had come for a single purpose: to carry out the ultimate betrayal, one that would echo throughout history and change everything. The society they had dedicated their lives to, the brotherhood they had sworn to protect, was about to be torn apart from within, not by their enemies, but by their own hands. It was an event that had been foretold, a sequence of actions set into motion long before the men had even entered the abbey. These men weren't just soldiers, scholars, or politicians. They were part of something greater, something darker. Their unity had once been unshakable, but now it was fractured, broken by the poison of ambition, greed, and secrecy. The chest that lay before them was not just a mere container. It was a symbol of everything they had worked for, everything they had believed in. But now it represented their impending downfall. They were about to make a choice that would destroy them from the inside, a choice that could never be undone. It was as if the very foundations of their society had been built on a lie so powerful and so deeply ingrained that it had become impossible to recognize. What began as an order rooted in noble ideals, protection, brotherhood, and the pursuit of knowledge, had now become a breeding ground for betrayal. This was not an attack from the outside. This was the collapse of an empire from within, a self-inflicted wound that would bleed for centuries to come. As the leader of the group stepped forward, his face obscured by a dark mask, a sense of finality gripped the air. His voice, though calm, carried an authority that commanded silence. The men stood motionless, waiting for the signal, each one knowing what was about to transpire, but none daring to speak it aloud. The leader's eyes flickered to the chest, and for a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped. It was the moment of truth, the moment when their loyalty would be tested, when everything they had ever known would be turned upside down. The chest was not just a key to power, it was the key to their destruction. What would cause men to betray their own brothers in such a manner? What was so valuable, so dangerous, that it would drive them to destroy everything they had worked for? It wasn't just about greed, nor was it about the pursuit of power. It was deeper than that, far deeper. The truth they had uncovered, the knowledge they had gained, was a double-edged sword. It had the potential to grant them unimaginable power, but it also had the power to destroy them from the inside. This was the true danger of the secret societies they had belonged to. What they had sought to protect had become their very undoing. In the darkness of that courtyard, the chest was opened, and the men gazed upon what lay inside. It wasn't gold, nor jewels, nor any physical treasure. Instead, it was a series of ancient scrolls, the writings of men who had lived and died centuries before them. These scrolls contained knowledge that could change the world, knowledge that, if revealed, could tear apart the fabric of society itself. It was a secret that had been passed down through the ages, a secret so powerful that it had been guarded with blood and silence. The men knew what they had to do, but it wasn't an easy decision. The weight of their actions would haunt them forever. One by one, they took turns examining the scrolls, their fingers tracing the faded ink, as if it held the answers to everything they had ever wondered. They had been chosen for this moment, selected for their loyalty and their intellect, and now they stood on the precipice of a decision that would change the course of history. But as they read, something shifted within them. Doubt began to creep in. The knowledge they had uncovered was not what they had expected. It was not the truth they had hoped for. Instead, it was a revelation, an unsettling truth about the very nature of their existence, about the origins of their brotherhood, and about the forces that had been pulling the strings for centuries. In that moment, the realization hit them. They had been pawns in a much larger game. The very society they had sworn to protect had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. They had been complicit in something far darker than they had ever imagined. And now the time had come to make a choice. To either continue down the path they had been set on, or to expose the truth no matter the cost. But the decision was not an easy one. The stakes were too high. To reveal the truth would not only destroy the society, but it would also endanger their lives. They had come too far, gained too much, and learned too much to simply walk away. And yet, in the quiet of that night, in the cold, dimly lit courtyard, they understood something fundamental. No matter what they chose, they would never be the same again. As the leader turned to face his brothers, his mask a symbol of the secrecy that bound them, he knew that whatever happened next, their lives would be irrevocably altered. The chest, now empty, had served its purpose. The knowledge inside it had been their undoing. But the true cost of that knowledge, the cost of the truth, was something they were only beginning to comprehend. In the end, the betrayal wasn't just about the destruction of a secret society. It was about the destruction of everything they had believed in. The men who stood in that courtyard had been deceived, not by external enemies, but by the very ideals they had once held dear. The secret they had uncovered was not just dangerous. It was the mirror that reflected their own darkest fears. In their quest for power, they had unknowingly become the very thing they had sought to destroy. As the night wore on, the men disappeared into the shadows, their faces hidden, their thoughts clouded by the weight of their actions. The secret society that had once promised them brotherhood, loyalty, and protection had now become their prison. The truth, once hidden, had come to light, and with it came the unraveling of everything they had worked for. The sequence of events that had led to this moment was no accident. It was the inevitable result of their own ambition, their own greed, and their own betrayal. The echoes of that fateful night would reverberate through history, a haunting reminder of how secret societies, built on power and trust, could be torn apart from within. And as the men vanished into the night, they could not have known that their story would become part of a much larger, much darker narrative. A story of self-destruction, of the price of knowledge, and of the dangerous allure of secrets that should never be uncovered. The question lingered in the air. What if this betrayal was just the beginning? What if there were others, waiting in the shadows, ready to follow the same path? The answers lay hidden, locked away in the mysteries of the past, waiting for those brave enough to uncover them. The origins of secret societies stretch far back into the mists of history, shrouded in mystery and steeped in the kind of mysticism that has fascinated generations of curious minds. These organizations, often cloaked in ritual and secrecy, were born out of a desire for power, protection, and purpose. In the early centuries, as ancient civilizations sought to preserve knowledge and safeguard their most sacred truths, these societies began to form. Their members were often not the ruling elite, but those who sought to rise above their station by forging bonds of secrecy and mutual aid. In this shadowed world, knowledge was not just power. It was the key to unlocking untold influence over the course of history. At their core, these societies promised something rare and precious: belonging. They offered a form of brotherhood, a sense of community that transcended the rigid social structures of the time. For many of the men who joined these orders, membership was a way of stepping outside the confines of the mundane world. They sought to transcend their ordinary lives, to become part of something greater, something eternal. This search for meaning was not merely intellectual. It was emotional. It was a yearning for significance in a world that often seemed indifferent to the struggles of the individual. In ancient Egypt, where the first traces of secret societies can be found, the idea of esoteric knowledge began to take root. The priests and scribes who held the keys to the mysteries of the universe were not just scholars. They were guardians of secrets that, if revealed, could shake the very foundations of society. The temples, with their intricate rituals and sacred texts, became the birthplace of secret traditions that would eventually transcend cultures and time periods. It was within these hallowed walls that the concept of initiatory orders was first formed. To gain entry into these secret circles was to be granted access to forbidden knowledge, knowledge that, it was believed, could lead one to enlightenment, power, or even immortality. This sense of transcendence would prove to be an irresistible lure for generations of seekers. As time passed, the ideals of these early societies began to spread, adapting and evolving to the changing political and social climates. In the ancient world, we see the earliest stirrings of the most famous secret societies. Groups like the Pythagoreans in Greece, who pursued wisdom through mathematics and philosophy, and the Essenes in Judea, who guarded spiritual teachings in isolation from the world. These groups were not just intellectual movements. They were revolutionary in their approach to knowledge and power. The Pythagoreans believed that mathematics was the key to understanding the universe, a belief that led them to hold sacred the geometric ratios that govern nature. The Essenes, on the other hand, were spiritual warriors, guarding the esoteric teachings of the Old Testament and the coming of the Messiah. Each group, in its own way, represented a rejection of the mainstream societal structures in favor of hidden truths, truths that were not for the common man to understand. But it was in the medieval period that the true power and allure of secret societies would come into their own. The Catholic Church, with its vast reach and influence, had an iron grip on knowledge. Books were scarce, and the common people were kept in ignorance. The monks and scholars who resided in the monasteries were the only ones with access to the sacred texts. Yet, even within this cloistered environment, there existed a sense of rebellion. It was here that the first whispers of what would become the most powerful and enduring secret societies of all, groups like the Freemasons and the Knights Templar, began to take shape. The Freemasons, originally stonemasons who built the great cathedrals and castles of Europe, soon found themselves at the center of a much larger conspiracy. As they learned the secrets of architecture and geometry, they also began to explore the deeper mysteries of the universe. Their lodges, built in secret, became centers of both intellectual and spiritual power. It was here that the early foundations of modern Freemasonry were laid, as men came together to share their knowledge of ancient traditions and hidden sciences. These societies weren't just about building physical structures. They were about constructing a hidden reality, one that was governed by laws and principles that only the initiated could understand. The Knights Templar, a military order originally founded to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, also became embroiled in the world of secret knowledge and power. Their rise to prominence during the Crusades marked them as one of the most influential forces of the medieval world. But as their power grew, so did the envy of others. Their wealth and influence became a threat to both the church and secular rulers alike. In the early 14th century, the order was brutally dismantled by King Philip IV of France, who sought to seize their wealth and power. Yet, despite their fall, the myth of the Templars persisted. Legends of their hidden treasures, their secret knowledge, and their ties to the ancient mysteries continued to circulate, giving rise to a fascination with their secrets that would endure for centuries. The disappearance of the Templars did not signal the end of secret societies. It was only the beginning. Over the next few centuries, as Europe grappled with the tumult of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment, these secret groups continued to grow in influence. The rise of the intellectual elite, many of whom were Freemasons, brought with it an increased interest in the occult, alchemy, and the search for hidden wisdom. The Renaissance, with its rediscovery of classical knowledge, sparked a renewed interest in ancient secrets and esoteric traditions. The thinkers and philosophers of the time, many of whom belonged to secret societies, sought to uncover the mysteries of the universe and the human soul. They believed that the ancient teachings of Egypt, Greece, and Rome held the keys to understanding the world, and they were determined to unlock them. The 18th century marked a turning point in the history of secret societies. This was the age of the Enlightenment, a time when reason, science, and individual rights began to challenge the authority of the church and the monarchy. It was also the era when the Illuminati, a secret society founded in Bavaria in 1776, emerged as one of the most influential and controversial organizations of its time. The Illuminati, led by the philosopher Adam Weishaupt, sought to challenge the established order by promoting the ideals of reason, liberty, and secularism. They believed that through education and the spread of knowledge, they could rid the world of superstition and tyranny. But as their influence grew, so did the fear of their enemies. The Illuminati were accused of plotting to overthrow governments and destroy religion, and by the end of the century, the society had been disbanded. But like the Templars before them, the Illuminati's legend lived on. Their name became synonymous with conspiracy, and their supposed influence over world events has been the subject of countless theories ever since. As the centuries passed, the nature of secret societies continued to evolve. No longer were they purely intellectual or spiritual organizations. They became entangled with politics, power, and wealth. The Freemasons, for example, played a significant role in the founding of the United States, with many of the country's founding fathers, including George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, being members. The Freemasons' ideals of liberty and fraternity resonated with the new nation's ideals, and their influence helped shape the democratic ideals that would define America for centuries. But as secret societies became more entwined with the workings of power, they also became more secretive and more dangerous. By the 19th century, the secret society had become a symbol of rebellion, both against the established order and against the very idea of secrecy itself. The idea of a hidden hand pulling the strings of power became a central theme in political discourse, with conspiracy theories flourishing in the wake of the French Revolution and the rise of new, radical ideologies. The rise of industrialism and the spread of new technologies only fueled the sense that there were forces operating behind the scenes, manipulating events to their own ends. The more society progressed, the more entrenched these hidden networks seemed to become. Today, the legacy of these ancient secret societies is still alive, woven into the fabric of modern life. The Freemasons, the Illuminati, and countless other groups continue to capture the imagination of people around the world, inspiring books, movies, and conspiracy theories. Their myths, their symbols, and their rituals persist, even as the world around them changes. But what is it that makes these societies so enduring? What is it about their secrecy, their power, and their promise of knowledge that continues to captivate us? Perhaps it is the idea that behind every great movement, behind every significant shift in history, there is a hidden force at work, guiding events in ways that are beyond our understanding. The allure of secret societies lies in their ability to suggest that there is more to the world than what meets the eye, that beneath the surface of everyday life, there are truths that, if revealed, could change everything. It is this sense of mystery, of the unknown, that continues to draw us in, making us wonder. What if everything we know is just the beginning? What if there are secrets out there, waiting to be uncovered, that could rewrite the course of history itself? In every secret society, there exists a series of hidden bonds, unspoken oaths that bind their members in ways that go beyond mere friendship or allegiance. These aren't just casual promises. They are deeply sacred commitments, forged in secrecy, and maintained under the threat of severe consequences for betrayal. For the members of these societies, the initiation rituals are more than just formalities. They are rites of passage that signify entry into a world few will ever know, a world that is both alluring and dangerous. It's here, within the confines of darkened rooms and hidden chambers, that a member's first true test of loyalty begins. The rituals themselves are steeped in symbolism, drawn from ancient traditions, blending elements of mysticism, philosophy, and religion. These societies thrive on a set of codes and allegiances that are incomprehensible to those outside their circle. To the uninitiated, these practices seem nothing more than bizarre ceremonies. But to those involved, they hold deep meaning. The first act of initiation might seem innocuous enough, reciting oaths, swearing secrecy, and signing a covenant. Yet these rituals are layered with symbols, each representing a deeper, more profound mystery. From the burning of incense to the passing of sacred texts, the member is guided through a process that transforms them, in their mind, from an ordinary individual into something far greater. The secrets that these societies hold are not just intellectual. They are meant to affect the very core of one's being. What most outsiders don't realize is that it's not just the knowledge within these societies that keeps members bound to them, but the very structure of loyalty itself. The promise of brotherhood is enticing, especially in a world often defined by loneliness and competition. The initiation process, which often feels like the unveiling of a grand truth, forms a powerful emotional connection. It is during this moment that members, having passed through the tests, feel like they've gained access to something sacred, something rare and precious. And this is where the true power of secrecy lies. For once a person has made that leap, once they have crossed that threshold, they have entered into a world where the cost of breaking their oath becomes unbearable. They aren't just betraying an organization, they are betraying themselves. The consequences of breaking that bond, of being exposed, are often far greater than what the outside world can comprehend. Their lives may be ruined, and worse, the very truth they've worked to protect will be destroyed in the process. So they stay quiet. They continue to live under the shadow of secrecy, unable to fully break free from the weight of their own loyalty. But it isn't just the fear of punishment that keeps them loyal. It's something more insidious. The longer a member remains within the society, the more they come to depend on it, both emotionally and psychologically. It becomes their identity. Their connection to the group is no longer just about the promises they made on the night of their initiation. It is about what they have become through their involvement. For many, the society provides a sense of purpose that the outside world never could. These men, and sometimes women, have spent so much of their lives in the pursuit of something greater, something transcendent, that they have lost sight of the life they once knew. They have come to believe in the society's mission, often seeing it as a higher calling. What began as a desire for knowledge and power has morphed into something deeply personal. The society becomes a family, one more important than any bloodline or social connection they may have had before. The bonds they form within these walls are not easily severed, even if those bonds are the very chains that will eventually lead to their destruction. For some, the initiation rituals and oaths serve as a means of transcendence. They come to believe that the society is a vehicle for spiritual or intellectual enlightenment, an opportunity to understand truths that are hidden from the rest of society. The wisdom passed down through the generations becomes an almost religious pursuit. These men and women see themselves as protectors of the secret, the keepers of a fire that must not be extinguished. But as time passes, as the thirst for this hidden knowledge deepens, they begin to realize that the knowledge they seek is not purely enlightening. It is, at times, dark. The more they uncover, the more they begin to see that these societies are not just about understanding the world but about controlling it. There is a subtle shift, a realization that the secrecy that once seemed so noble has started to warp into something else. Power begins to seep in. The very knowledge they once sought to protect starts to become the thing that gives them control over others. And this is where the true danger lies. The initiation ceremony, which once felt like an awakening, gradually becomes something far more insidious, a form of psychological manipulation. The secrecy, once understood as a noble pursuit of truth, begins to feel like a cage. The very rituals that were once liberating become chains, and the sense of brotherhood becomes a means of control. It's during this time, as members grow deeper into the society, that cracks begin to form. What was once a pure bond of mutual trust begins to be overshadowed by distrust, suspicion, and paranoia. Loyalty, once so strong, begins to fracture, and the very structure of the organization starts to erode from the inside out. The society's survival, once tied to the strength of its oaths and its unity, now depends on the members' ability to keep secrets, but also on their ability to maintain faith in the mission. As they begin to question the morality of their actions and the true purpose of the society, a deep rift emerges. At this point, the nobody sequence begins to take root. This is the critical moment when a society begins to unravel from within. It is not an external attack that causes the collapse. It is a series of small, insidious cracks in the foundation. These cracks may be born from doubt, from a member who becomes disillusioned with the organization, or from the slow realization that the society's original ideals have been corrupted. The first signs are subtle. A whispered conversation behind closed doors, a single act of defiance, a shared moment of hesitation. These small instances are often dismissed as anomalies, as rare occurrences that don't pose a serious threat. But in truth, they are the first whispers of the nobody sequence, the inevitable self-destruction of a society that has lost its way. As the tension within the society grows, the emotional toll on its members becomes unbearable. The sense of betrayal, both from the organization and from their fellow brothers and sisters, becomes overwhelming. Many who have dedicated their lives to these groups begin to question everything they have stood for. They wonder if the very secrets they have sworn to protect are actually the seeds of their own demise. The knowledge that once felt like a key to enlightenment now feels like a poison slowly spreading through their veins. It is this realization that makes the collapse so tragic, because for many of these members, they are not just losing their allegiance to the society. They are losing their entire identity. The very person they have become through their loyalty and their pursuit of knowledge is being undone, piece by piece. It is here, at the precipice of self-destruction, that the true human cost of secrecy and power is revealed. The pursuit of knowledge, once seen as a noble cause, has led them down a dark and treacherous path. The bonds that once held them together have become the very shackles that will tear them apart. And yet, even as they stand on the edge of this precipice, some will continue to fight to protect the secret, even if they no longer understand why. They have invested so much of their lives in the society, so much of their identity in its mission, that they can no longer see a way out. The cycle of secrecy and betrayal continues, perpetuated by those who believe that the secret must be protected at all costs, even if it costs them their soul. The tragedy, however, is that these societies are not just destroyed by their external enemies. They are undone by their own internal contradictions. They are destroyed by the very loyalty that once made them strong, by the very secrecy that once kept them safe. The trust they place in one another becomes the knife that slowly cuts through the heart of the organization. It is the nobody sequence, a pattern of self-destruction that cannot be avoided once it has begun. And as the last remnants of these once great societies crumble away, the members who survive are left to question what they have lost, and whether the knowledge they sought was ever worth the price they paid. As they walk away from the ruins of their once sacred brotherhoods, they are left with nothing but the painful realization that their pursuit of truth and power has ultimately led them to their own undoing. They are no longer the men they once were, bound together by a sacred oath. They are simply individuals, broken and alone, wandering through the wreckage of their former lives. And yet, in the quiet of their hearts, they know one thing for certain. The nobody sequence is never truly over. It is a pattern that repeats itself, again and again, in every secret society, in every hidden order, and in every brotherhood that has ever fallen from grace. The secret, it seems, is never really safe. It is a living thing, and it can destroy the very ones who seek to protect it. There are moments in history when a seemingly innocent event triggers a sequence of events so far-reaching and profound that it changes the course of everything that follows. This is the nature of the nobody sequence, a hidden, elusive chain of actions, often sparked by a small incident or a passing decision, that sets in motion the self-destruction of an institution or a society. It's a phenomenon that often goes unnoticed at first, like the faint ripple that expands into a devastating tidal wave. No one sees it coming until it is too late to stop. The beauty and the terror of this sequence is that it doesn't require an external enemy or a grand conspiracy to succeed. It's the result of the society's own internal weaknesses, its fractured bonds, and the gradual erosion of trust that comes from keeping too many secrets for too long. The nobody sequence often begins with something small, a moment that, when viewed in isolation, seems trivial or even irrelevant. But it is precisely in the minutiae of these small, seemingly insignificant events that the seeds of destruction are planted. Take, for example, a member who begins to question the rituals or the promises made during initiation. This member might not even voice their concerns aloud, but the mere fact that doubt has entered their mind is enough to start a ripple. The moment they begin to wonder, what if this isn't what I thought it was? They have already begun the process of undoing the society. The question, once posed, can never truly be forgotten. It festers, it grows, and it demands answers. The moment of doubt, no matter how fleeting, becomes the first step in a larger unraveling. Over time, the doubts spread. One member's questions lead to another's. A glance here, a whispered conversation there. What was once a tight-knit group bound by shared purpose begins to fracture. These small fissures, invisible to outsiders, are the cracks in the foundation of the society. At first, the members might still be able to pretend that everything is fine, that they are united in their mission. But the tension grows beneath the surface. Slowly, the once sacred oaths begin to feel like chains, and the trust that once held the group together starts to dissolve. It is in these moments of growing discomfort that the seeds of betrayal are planted, and with them, the seeds of the nobody sequence. As this internal conflict deepens, the society's core values that once seemed so clear, become muddied. The ideal of brotherhood begins to lose its luster when members start to see one another not as brothers, but as competitors, as obstacles standing in the way of their personal ambitions. The secrets that once seemed like sacred knowledge now feel like burdens, holding them back from achieving their individual desires. What once was a noble pursuit of truth and power transforms into a contest for control. The leaders of the society, once seen as wise and unwavering, begin to show signs of weakness. Their decisions, once considered infallible, now seem flawed and self-serving. It is during this time of uncertainty that the first real signs of the nobody sequence begin to appear, moments when the organization, once invulnerable, is now exposed to the risks of its own internal decay. The next phase of the nobody sequence is marked by a subtle yet profound shift in the behavior of the society's members. The bonds of loyalty that once seemed unbreakable are now tested in ways that no one could have anticipated. Small acts of rebellion begin to take place behind closed doors. A member may reveal a small secret to another, a seemingly innocent piece of information that, in the grand scheme of things, seems harmless. But the trust that is broken with this small act is not something that can be easily repaired. The delicate balance of secrecy and loyalty that the society had maintained for so long begins to tip. Once that first betrayal occurs, whether it's the disclosure of a secret, the questioning of authority, or the undermining of a fellow member, the nobody sequence begins to accelerate. There is no turning back once the first piece of the puzzle has fallen into place. What makes the nobody sequence so devastating is that it often leads to a complete unraveling of the society's foundation before anyone realizes what has happened. In the blink of an eye, everything that had once been sacred becomes a liability. The rituals that once bound the members together now serve to drive them apart. The shared knowledge, which was once a source of strength, now becomes a weapon used against each other. The sacred oaths, which had once been taken with the utmost seriousness, become hollow words that ring out in the empty chambers of their secret meeting rooms. And in the midst of all of this, the very reason for the society's existence, its mission, its purpose, begins to fade into obscurity. What had once been a noble pursuit becomes a distant memory, and in its place is a desperate scramble for power, control, and survival. This internal collapse is often accompanied by a profound psychological shift among the members. They begin to see the world differently, not as a place of shared ideals, but as a battlefield, a place where every action, every word, every look has the potential to be turned against them. The sense of unity that once existed now feels like a lie, and the members, once united in their pursuit of knowledge or power, begin to see each other as threats. This paranoia takes root and spreads, feeding off the secrecy and distrust that has already begun to infiltrate the organization. Even the smallest act of defiance or rebellion is seen as a betrayal, and the society begins to turn on itself. Members who once trusted one another implicitly now become fearful of each other's intentions. The nobody sequence has reached its critical mass, and the society is on the brink of collapse. As the chaos spreads, the original purpose of the society becomes lost in the noise. What was once a noble cause, whether it was the pursuit of knowledge, the protection of a sacred truth, or the creation of a new world order, becomes irrelevant. The members are no longer fighting for ideals. They are fighting to survive, fighting to protect what little remains of the society's fragile structure. And in this struggle, the very thing that held the society together, the trust among its members, becomes the thing that destroys it. The more the members fight to maintain control, the more they expose their own vulnerabilities. The nobody sequence has already ensured that the society will collapse from within. No external force is needed. The members, in their desperation and fear, will do the work for their enemies. One of the most tragic aspects of the nobody sequence is the way it leads to a total breakdown of meaning. What was once a place of shared purpose and ideals is reduced to a hollow shell of its former self. The knowledge that once held the society together now becomes nothing more than a weapon used for personal gain. The bonds of loyalty, once so strong, are reduced to nothing more than a series of fragile alliances that shift with the wind. The original purpose of the society, whether it was to protect a secret, to wield power, or to achieve enlightenment, becomes irrelevant. All that remains is a desperate scramble for survival. It is in this moment that the full tragedy of the nobody sequence is revealed. The very pursuit that once seemed so noble has become the cause of the society's destruction. As the society collapses, the members are left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. Many will walk away, disillusioned, carrying the scars of their betrayal and their failure. The secret that once held them together, the knowledge, the power, the truth, now feels like a curse, a weight that they cannot escape. Those who remain loyal to the cause are often left to rebuild from the ashes, but they, too, are forever changed by the experience. The nobody sequence has claimed everything: the brotherhood, the knowledge, the power, and ultimately, their very sense of identity. And as they fade into history, the question remains: was it worth it? Was the pursuit of knowledge and power worth the cost of everything they lost? In the end, the nobody sequence serves as a harsh reminder of the dangers of secrecy and ambition. It shows how a seemingly small act, a moment of doubt, or a single betrayal can unravel even the most powerful of organizations. And it leaves us with a chilling realization. In the pursuit of power, there are always unintended consequences. The true cost of knowledge is not just the price of the secrets themselves. It is the destruction that comes with it. The nobody sequence is not just a pattern of events. It is a warning that no secret, no matter how carefully guarded, is ever truly safe from the forces of betrayal and self-destruction. As the cracks begin to show within a society, and the members begin to turn on one another, the destruction becomes a slow but inevitable process. What started as a group united by a common cause, bound together by shared values and secrecy, now transforms into something much darker. The society, once a fortress of trust and purpose, begins to splinter. The damage is not just a result of external forces but stems from the very individuals who were once loyal to its cause. These are the moments when a society, on the brink of collapse, finds itself caught in a cycle of self-doubt, paranoia, and betrayal, until everything it stood for is lost. It begins, often imperceptibly, with the questioning of authority. Those in positions of power, the ones who once led the society with conviction and certainty, begin to show signs of vulnerability. In the early days, this is often dismissed as an anomaly. After all, even the strongest leaders have their moments of uncertainty. But as time goes on, these small cracks begin to widen. The decisions that once seemed wise are now scrutinized, the motivations behind them questioned. Members, who once followed orders without hesitation, now hesitate. It starts with whispers in the shadows, conversations held in corners, beneath the veil of secrecy that was once so sacred. The truth, or at least the version of it that the society had held dear, is no longer so clear. This erosion of confidence in leadership leads to a shift in dynamics. Once, there had been a clear hierarchy. Those at the top, the ones who held the keys to the society's secrets, were revered and obeyed without question. But now that reverence begins to fade. The cracks have reached the core, and the foundation of respect, which once held everything together, is beginning to crumble. In such moments of instability, it's not just the leaders who begin to falter. The society's very principles, those core ideals that once defined its purpose, start to be seen through a different lens. What was once an unassailable truth becomes an object of scrutiny. Members begin to ask themselves difficult questions. Were we wrong to believe in this? Is this still the right path? If the truth we've guarded for so long is now in doubt, what does that mean for everything we've worked for? These questions are not asked lightly, and their consequences are profound. To question the very foundation of the society is to question one's own identity. For many of the members, the society has become more than just an organization. It has become their life. It defines who they are, their purpose in the world. To question it is, in many ways, to question their own existence. This is where the real psychological toll begins. The longer a person remains within the society, the more their entire sense of self becomes intertwined with it. They don't just follow its rules. They live by them. Their sense of morality, their worldview, is shaped by what the society has taught them. So when doubt enters the picture, it shakes them to their core. It's not just the group that begins to fracture. It's the members themselves. The process of questioning their beliefs becomes a process of questioning their very identity. As these doubts fester and spread, they inevitably lead to division. The unity that once held the society together is no longer present. The members begin to splinter into factions, each group holding its own vision of what the society should be. Some members cling desperately to the ideals that once defined the group, refusing to let go of what they have always believed. Others, however, begin to drift away from these ideals. They seek power, wealth, or influence for themselves. They see the society not as a brotherhood but as a means to an end. The society's mission, once focused on enlightenment or the pursuit of truth, is now viewed through a lens of personal ambition. The pursuit of knowledge, once a noble endeavor, becomes a weapon in the hands of those who seek to use it for their own gain. The bond that was once unbreakable now becomes a tool for manipulation. The unity that once existed, even if based on secrecy, now turns into a fractured and volatile mix of competing interests. At this stage, the society's internal disintegration accelerates. What was once a collective pursuit of a higher goal becomes an individualistic struggle for control. Trust between members evaporates, and the lines between friend and foe blur. The very secrecy that once bound the group together now becomes its greatest liability. The more secrets are kept, the more the truth is obscured, and the more paranoia sets in. Each member wonders who they can trust, who might be working against them. The atmosphere becomes toxic. The knowledge that was once shared freely among brothers is now hoarded, kept close to the chest. Secrets that were once meant to protect the society now serve only to drive wedges between its members. The very foundation of secrecy that held them together begins to suffocate them, until no one knows who their allies are and who their enemies might be. This is when the nobody sequence truly begins to take form. What starts as small fissures of doubt and dissent soon erupts into open conflict. The factions within the society begin to vie for power, using the same methods they once employed to maintain control over their members. The hierarchy that once seemed invulnerable becomes a battleground. Each faction believes it holds the key to restoring the society to its former glory, or at least to using its remnants for their own gain. In the scramble for power, alliances are formed and broken, and trust becomes a rare commodity. Some members resort to underhanded tactics to achieve their goals, while others retreat into themselves, unwilling to engage in the infighting that has overtaken their once sacred institution. But no matter what path they choose, the result is the same. The society becomes a shadow of its former self. The infighting and the struggle for control take a toll not only on the members but also on the society's core mission. What was once a noble pursuit, a quest for knowledge, power, or enlightenment, becomes irrelevant in the face of internal collapse. The ideals that once motivated the society's formation are lost in the fog of power struggles. The mission is forgotten, replaced by the need for self-preservation. Each member, once driven by a sense of higher purpose, now becomes consumed by a desire to survive, to maintain their place within the fractured organization. The idealistic goals of the society are no longer important. All that matters is the ability to hold on to what is left. In a society built on secrecy, the very act of survival becomes an act of betrayal. This internal chaos reaches its apex when the society's very existence is threatened. As the factions fight for control, the organization begins to fracture irreparably. The unity that once defined the group is now nothing more than a distant memory. The society that had once operated with a clear sense of purpose is now adrift, its members lost in the confusion of their own self-interest. And as the end draws near, many members are left with nothing but the hollow realization that everything they had worked for, the knowledge, the power, the bonds of brotherhood, was ultimately meaningless. The pursuit of truth that had once been so noble is now a hollow shell, destroyed by the very individuals who had once pledged their lives to protect it. In the final moments, the society's collapse is swift and brutal. What remains is a fractured organization, one that no longer resembles the group that had once been so powerful. Those who remain loyal are either too disillusioned to continue or too entangled in the web of betrayal to escape. The secrets that were once so carefully guarded are now exposed, their value diminished by the knowledge that they were never meant to protect the greater good. They were meant to protect the power structures of the society, to keep the few in control at the expense of the many. And as the society crumbles, the members are left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives, wondering if it was ever worth it. But even in the ashes of their destruction, the members are left with a haunting question. How did they let it all slip away? How did a once powerful organization, built on trust and shared ideals, collapse so utterly and completely? The answer lies not in the external forces that sought to destroy them, but in the very core of the society itself, in its secrets, its power, and in the human flaws that allowed it to self-destruct. The nobody sequence is a reminder that the greatest threat to any society is not the enemy outside, but the forces within, forces of ambition, fear, and betrayal that can undo everything, no matter how strong the foundations once seemed. And once the cracks appear, it's only a matter of time before the structure collapses entirely. The society's demise is inevitable, for it was never a question of whether it would fall. It was always a question of when. In the aftermath of the societal collapse, the individuals who were once part of these organizations face the haunting reality of their own choices. The members of a secret society who survived the infighting, betrayal, and destruction are left grappling with profound questions about their role in the society's downfall. Once devoted followers, bound together by shared ideals and oaths, they now stand at the edge of a precipice, staring into a world that feels unrecognizable. What they had built, with so much passion and dedication, is now nothing more than a shattered reflection of its former self. The collapse of the society is not merely a physical or organizational downfall. It is an emotional and psychological unraveling of the very individuals who helped sustain it. For many of them, the collapse is a deeply personal experience. The bonds that once connected them to their brothers and sisters within the society were not just ideological or intellectual. They were profoundly emotional. These were individuals who, for years, shared not only their most intimate thoughts and fears, but also a sense of purpose that transcended the mundane world. The rituals, the secret knowledge, the mutual trust, it all became part of their identity. It was a belief system, a framework for understanding the world, and a path that they had chosen to walk, often at great personal cost. And yet, when the society began to unravel, when the cracks first appeared, these same individuals were forced to confront the truth of what they had been involved in. The realization comes not as a sudden shock but as a gradual sinking feeling, like an inescapable weight pressing down on their chests. The ideals they had held so dearly now seem like illusions. The sense of purpose that once defined them has been replaced with a hollow emptiness. The survivors of the collapse are often left in a state of profound disillusionment. They were not just betrayed by their fellow members, but by the very system they had dedicated their lives to. The belief that they were part of something larger than themselves, something sacred and noble, is shattered. They begin to see the society for what it truly was, a power structure built on secrecy, manipulation, and control. The very knowledge that they had once guarded so carefully now feels like a burden rather than a gift. The promises made during initiation, the oaths to protect the truth, to defend the ideals, feel like chains, binding them to a past they no longer recognize. The betrayal they experience is not just from others but from within themselves. They feel as though they were complicit in the very forces that led to the society's destruction. The question that haunts them is a simple one, yet it lingers like an unshakable echo. How could they have been so blind? The fallout from the collapse also brings about a deep personal crisis. For many of the former members, the society had been their refuge from the chaos of the outside world. It had provided them with a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging that they could not find elsewhere. It was a place where they could step outside the constraints of society and pursue something greater. But now that the society is gone, they are forced to confront the stark reality of their lives. What do they have left? Without the society, who are they? The bonds that once defined them, brotherhood, loyalty, secrecy, are now nothing more than fading memories. These individuals must now re-enter a world that feels foreign to them, a world that they have spent years distancing themselves from. The struggle to reintegrate into society is not merely a physical one. It is an existential battle. The survivors' guilt weighs heavily on their shoulders, as they grapple with the knowledge that they were part of something that ultimately led to its own destruction. Some try to move forward, to leave the past behind them and rebuild their lives. But even those who attempt to break free from the grip of the secret society find that its influence lingers. The lessons they learned, the allegiances they formed, and the knowledge they acquired cannot simply be erased. It remains like a shadow, following them wherever they go. They cannot forget the experiences they shared, the sacrifices they made, and the moral compromises they allowed themselves to accept. The society, in a sense, continues to define them, even in its absence. The emotional scars left by the collapse are not easily healed, and the damage done to their sense of self can last a lifetime. For others, the collapse drives them deeper into a state of paranoia and distrust. Having seen the society disintegrate from within, they become increasingly cynical, unwilling to trust anyone ever again. The world that they once viewed through the lens of idealism now seems like a web of deception and manipulation. They see conspiracies everywhere, patterns and connections where others see only randomness. The very secrecy that once felt like a sacred duty now seems like a trap, one that they have been caught in for far too long. These individuals may withdraw from society altogether, choosing to live in isolation rather than face the reality of a world that has betrayed them. The collapse of the society has not only shattered their belief in the system but has also severed their ability to relate to others in any meaningful way. They are left to wander through life with a sense of disconnection, unable to shake the feeling that they are forever marked by their association with the secret society. In the wake of the collapse, some members may attempt to rebuild what was lost, seeking to restore the society to its former glory. They may try to form new alliances, recruit new members, and revive the rituals and beliefs that once gave them strength. But this effort is often in vain. The foundation has already crumbled, and the knowledge that they are trying to preserve is now tainted by the memory of what has transpired. The power structures that once held the society together are gone, and the ideals they seek to revive are no longer pure. The attempt to restore the society becomes a futile exercise, driven by the fear of facing the reality that what was once sacred can never be reclaimed. The ghost of the society's past continues to haunt those who attempt to rebuild it, reminding them that they cannot escape the consequences of their actions. Perhaps the most tragic consequence of the collapse is the way it affects those who were closest to the society, those who had devoted their lives to it, only to see it fall apart in a single, inevitable sequence. These individuals are often left with nothing but a shattered sense of self. They are forced to confront the fact that the very thing they had given everything for was never meant to last. The idealism that once fueled their every action now seems naive, and they are left wondering if the pursuit of knowledge, power, or purpose was ever worth the price they paid. The scars they carry are not just emotional, they are philosophical, existential. What do you do when everything you've built, everything you've worked for, crumbles before your eyes? How do you pick up the pieces of your life when you no longer know what the pieces are? The psychological toll of the collapse is not confined to the members alone. The wider world, too, is affected by the unraveling of these societies. The secrets that were once carefully guarded are now exposed, and the knowledge that was meant to remain hidden is brought into the light. For those who were outside the society, the collapse marks the end of a long period of speculation, suspicion, and myth. The truth, once shrouded in mystery, is now revealed, but it is not the truth they expected. The disillusionment that sets in when the society's secrets are exposed is as profound as the disillusionment felt by the former members. The world at large is forced to confront the fact that the things they once believed to be true, things they held dear, were not as they seemed. The revelation of the society's true nature can be a deeply unsettling experience, not only for the members but for the world that had looked up to them or feared them. But for those who have survived the collapse, there is no closure. The wounds, emotional and psychological, do not heal easily. The nobody sequence, the chain of events that led to the society's self-destruction, continues to haunt them. It becomes a defining chapter in their lives, a chapter that they cannot forget. The collapse is not just an event in their past. It is a shadow that looms over everything they do, everything they become. And though they may try to move on, they can never truly escape the consequences of their involvement in the society. The question they are left with, the question that never truly goes away, is simple. Was it worth it? As the collapse of the society reaches its climax, a deep sense of loss begins to settle in, not just among the former members but also within the remnants of the organization itself. There is a pervasive sense of finality in the air. For many, the realization hits hardest in the silence that follows, the absence of shared purpose, the lack of certainty that once defined their existence. The silence is not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of meaning. What had once been an entity filled with activity, secrecy, and purpose now sits in ruins, a testament to the destructive potential of unchecked loyalty and ambition. The survivors are left to navigate the fallout, burdened by the knowledge that they are, in many ways, the architects of their own destruction. The process of grappling with this realization is far from straightforward. Initially, there is often a sense of disbelief, a refusal to accept that everything they had worked for, everything they had built together, has disintegrated so completely. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It had been a slow burn, a gradual unraveling of everything that once seemed invincible. But even so, when the final thread is pulled, and the society collapses entirely, it's almost impossible to reconcile with the image of strength and unity they once held. For many of these individuals, the society was not just a network of allies. It was their identity. To be a member was to be part of something larger than themselves, something that transcended the mundane, that offered the promise of knowledge, power, and purpose. Now, they are left without that identity, struggling to understand who they are without it. For some, the collapse is a devastating blow to their sense of self. They had devoted their lives to the society, shaping their entire worldview around its tenets. The ideals they once held dear are now tainted by betrayal and infighting, and the knowledge they protected feels like a burden rather than a privilege. Their purpose, once so clear, has evaporated, leaving them adrift. They find themselves questioning everything they once believed in, the very foundations of their identity, the choices they made, and the people they trusted. This crisis of identity can be overwhelming. The members of the society often spent so much time striving toward a future that they had no time to build a life beyond it. As their world collapses, they are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that they have nothing to return to, nothing to replace the void left by the destruction of the organization. The emotional toll of this collapse is profound. There is a mourning process, a deep sense of grief that permeates every aspect of their lives. It is not just the loss of the society that they mourn, but the loss of everything it represented: trust, power, unity, and purpose. The individuals who once stood shoulder to shoulder, bound together by oaths and secrets, are now scattered and broken, each facing the painful reality of what has been lost. They mourn the relationships that once felt invulnerable, the bonds that seemed unbreakable. The friendships and alliances that had been formed under the banner of the society now feel like hollow echoes, memories that only serve to deepen the sense of loss. There is no one left to confide in, no one who understands what they've been through. The secrecy that once kept them united now isolates them, leaving them in a state of emotional exile. This isolation often leads to a psychological shift. The survivors of the collapse find themselves living in a state of constant tension, always looking over their shoulders, always questioning the motives of those around them. Having once thrived in an environment built on secrecy and loyalty, They now feel naked and exposed in a world where nothing is as it seems. They become hyper-aware of every interaction, every conversation, as though everyone they meet is somehow connected to the society they have just left behind. Even the simplest exchanges feel loaded with significance. This sense of paranoia, while understandable given the circumstances, only serves to deepen the emotional rift. The very people they had once trusted implicitly are now viewed with suspicion, and the sense of community they once enjoyed has been replaced by a profound sense of alienation. In many ways, the survivors of the collapse are left in a state of perpetual limbo. They cannot go back to the society they once knew, and they cannot move forward into a new world without carrying the weight of their past. The ideals they once fought for now seem like distant, naive dreams, and the knowledge they gained during their time in the society feels like a poisoned gift. It is difficult to look at the world with fresh eyes after having been so deeply entrenched in a system that was built on secrecy and manipulation. The survivors are often caught between two worlds, the one they left behind and the one they now inhabit. They cannot fully integrate into either world, leaving them in a constant state of conflict and disillusionment. This internal conflict is compounded by the fact that many of them cannot simply walk away from the past. The society, with its secrets and its rituals, has left a permanent mark on their lives. The lessons they learned, the values they adopted, and the bonds they formed are not easily discarded. Even as they try to move on, they are haunted by the ghosts of their former lives. These memories are not just nostalgic. They are laden with guilt, regret, and shame. The survivors often feel as though they have been abandoned by the very principles they once held sacred. The collapse, in many ways, feels like a betrayal not just of the society but of themselves. The emotional aftermath of the collapse is not confined to the survivors alone. The society's downfall also has a ripple effect on the larger world. The exposure of the society's secrets, once guarded with the utmost care, sends shockwaves through the wider community. People who once feared the society or revered it now find themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The once mysterious organization is now revealed for what it truly was, and its secrets, once locked away behind walls of silence, are now laid bare. This revelation, for some, is a moment of catharsis, a sense of closure that they have long been waiting for. But for others, it is a disorienting and destabilizing experience. The truth, once hidden behind layers of deception, now forces them to confront the reality that everything they believed about the society, about power, and about truth was a lie. This collective shock reverberates through the community, leaving everyone to wonder what other truths have been concealed in the shadows. For the survivors, this external revelation is an additional layer of disillusionment. The world now sees what they have long known, that the society was not what it seemed, that its true nature was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The once sacred secrets, which they had fought so hard to protect, now feel trivial and insignificant. The knowledge they held, which once gave them a sense of power, is now public and no longer valuable. In many ways, the exposure of the society's secrets mirrors the internal collapse they are experiencing. Just as the society's internal integrity crumbled, so too did its public facade. The survivors must now reckon with the fact that the world no longer sees the society through the same lens. The truth, once locked away in the hands of a select few, is now scattered to the winds, and with it goes the power and mystique that once made the society so formidable. But amidst this overwhelming sense of loss, something else begins to emerge, an opportunity for self-reflection. The collapse of the society, as painful and disorienting as it may be, opens up the possibility for renewal. The survivors are no longer bound by the shackles of their former allegiances. They are free to build new lives, to find new purposes. They no longer have to live in the shadow of secrecy, no longer have to answer to the invisible authority of the society that once controlled their every move. The question, however, is whether they are capable of rebuilding their lives, of finding new meaning after everything they have lost. For some, the answer is yes. They move forward, seeking redemption, seeking a way to reconcile the person they were with the person they want to become. For others, however, the scars of the collapse are too deep to overcome. The trauma of betrayal, guilt, and self-doubt becomes too much to bear, and they are left to wander in the ruins of their past. Ultimately, the collapse of the society marks a point of no return. There is no going back to the way things were, no possibility of resurrecting what has been lost. The survivors must now live with the knowledge that they have played a part in the destruction of something once great. The emotional weight of this realization is not easily borne, and it takes a lifetime to come to terms with. The society may be gone, but its impact lingers, shaping the lives of those who survived. And for them, the journey is far from over. The collapse may have been the end of an era, but it is also the beginning of something new. A new world, a new self, and a new path forward. The survivors must now figure out who they are without the society that once defined them, and in doing so, they must confront the most difficult question of all. What is left when everything that once mattered is gone? The aftermath of a society's collapse is not just a physical disintegration. It is a profound psychological and existential event. For those who were once part of it, the unraveling of everything they held dear is more than just the destruction of an institution. It is the collapse of their own identities, their purpose, and often their place in the world. What once seemed like a sanctuary, a world where everything had meaning and direction, now feels like a void. The principles, oaths, and rituals that defined their existence no longer hold any weight. The ideals that once illuminated their path have been replaced with a shadow of doubt, confusion, and fear. The destruction of the society is not just a loss of what was built. It is the dissolution of everything they had come to believe in. As they stand in the ruins of what once was, these individuals must confront the glaring emptiness left behind. The friends they thought they would walk beside for life, the bonds they thought would never break, have evaporated in an instant. The trust that once tied them together is gone, shattered by betrayal and internal collapse. These were not just colleagues or comrades. These were people who had shared in the same mission, the same vision for the future. To lose them is to lose a part of oneself, a fundamental part of one's identity. What happens when the people who once defined your world are no longer there? When the relationships you once trusted are revealed to have been based on fragile, hollow ground. In these moments of despair, the survivors often grapple with overwhelming feelings of guilt. They are haunted by the belief that they could have done more to save the society, to prevent the inevitable fall. These thoughts are not rational, but they persist nonetheless. They wonder if they were too naive, too trusting, or if they simply failed to see the warning signs that were right in front of them. In the quiet moments of reflection, they replay the events leading up to the collapse over and over again, searching for a point where things could have gone differently. They ask themselves questions that seem impossible to answer. What if they had stood up sooner? What if they had challenged the corrupt forces within the society before it was too late? These are the thoughts that torment them in the wake of their failure, the lingering doubts that will never truly go away. But the guilt is not the only emotion that plagues them. There is also a deep sense of betrayal, not just by their fellow members, but by the very ideals they had sworn to uphold. The collapse reveals a profound truth. The society was built on fragile foundations, and those who once held power within it were as flawed as the organization itself. The leaders who once guided them with wisdom and authority are now seen as weak, corrupt, or even cowardly. The rituals, once considered sacred, are now seen as nothing more than elaborate games, tools of manipulation rather than pathways to enlightenment. And the secrets they had guarded so fiercely, they are revealed as nothing more than smoke and mirrors, illusions created to maintain control and power. The truth that emerges is not the noble, enlightened pursuit they once believed in, but a harsh, brutal reality in which the pursuit of power and control led to the very destruction of the society itself. As they come to terms with this realization, many of the survivors find themselves at a crossroads. The question they now face is one of self-definition. Who are they without the society that once gave their lives meaning? What happens when the foundation upon which their entire identity was built is destroyed? The process of rebuilding is not just a matter of finding new alliances or new goals. It is a matter of rebuilding their very selves. Without the society, without its structure and purpose, they are left with a deep sense of disorientation. The world they once inhabited is gone, and in its place is a vast, empty space that they must fill with something else. But what can they fill it with? What can replace the sense of belonging and purpose that the society once provided? For many, the answer is not immediately clear. The trauma of betrayal and loss runs too deep, and the emotional scars of the collapse are not easily healed. The process of rebuilding is slow, painful, and filled with setbacks. Some survivors may try to seek solace in the same ideals that once defined the society, attempting to continue the mission on their own terms. But even as they try to move forward, they are haunted by the past. The knowledge they once possessed, the power they once wielded, now feels like a curse, a reminder of their failure. They are left with the burden of knowing the truth behind the society's collapse, and that truth is one they can never forget. For others, the collapse leads to a rejection of everything the society stood for. They turn their back on the ideals they once held so dearly, rejecting the very principles that shaped their lives. The society's collapse becomes a painful lesson in the dangers of blind loyalty, and they vow never to fall victim to such manipulation again. But even in this rejection, there is no true escape. The society's influence lingers, like a shadow that follows them wherever they go. As the survivors navigate this emotional and psychological turmoil, they are faced with another stark reality. The world outside is indifferent to their suffering. To the rest of society, the collapse of the secret society is little more than a footnote, a curiosity that will soon be forgotten. The survivors are left to pick up the pieces of their lives while the world moves on, oblivious to the deep wounds they carry. This sense of isolation is compounded by the knowledge that no one truly understands what they have been through. They are left to carry the burden of their experience alone, without the comfort of shared understanding. Even those who may have once been sympathetic to the society's cause now view them with suspicion, wary of the secrets they still harbor, even if those secrets no longer hold the power they once did. This emotional isolation is particularly painful because it is compounded by the loss of trust. The survivors are now acutely aware of how fragile human connections can be. They realize that the very people they once trusted with their lives can so easily become their betrayers. The bonds that once seemed unbreakable have been revealed to be weak and easily shattered. And so, as they attempt to rebuild their lives, they do so with a profound sense of skepticism. They cannot trust others in the same way they once did. Every new relationship, every new alliance, is viewed with suspicion. They wonder, is this person truly trustworthy? Or are they just another betrayer in disguise? This is the reality of life after the collapse. A life lived in a constant state of caution, where every action, every word, every look carries the potential for betrayal. As the survivors struggle to move forward, the weight of the collapse becomes a part of them, shaping their future in ways they cannot predict. Some may attempt to rebuild their lives by seeking out new communities, new organizations, or new causes. They may try to replace the sense of purpose they once had with something else, something that feels just as meaningful. But no matter how much they try, the shadow of their past will always follow them. They will never be able to completely escape the memory of what they lost, the lessons they learned the hard way, and the price they paid for their involvement in the society. Others may retreat into themselves, choosing to live solitary lives, disconnected from the world around them. The collapse has shown them just how fragile trust and loyalty can be, and they are unwilling to risk experiencing such betrayal again. For them, the idea of rejoining society, of seeking out new relationships, is a daunting prospect. The fear of being hurt again, of being betrayed once more, is too great to overcome. They live in isolation not out of choice, but out of necessity. The collapse has left them with a deep fear of intimacy, a fear that they may never be able to trust others again. But regardless of how the survivors choose to live after the collapse, one thing remains constant. The impact of the society's downfall is permanent. It changes them in ways that cannot be undone. The very fabric of their existence has been torn apart, and they are left to rebuild not just their lives, but their understanding of the world and their place in it. The collapse of the society was not just an event. It was a transformation, a turning point that altered the trajectory of their lives forever. And in the end, the question remains, can they ever truly escape the past? Or will they, forever, be defined by the shadows of a lost world? As the survivors of the collapsed society continue to rebuild their lives, one of the most pervasive feelings that emerges is the profound sense of emptiness that comes with losing not just a group or an organization, but a fundamental part of their identity. The society had been more than just a community. It was a lifeline, an anchor in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. The rituals, the shared knowledge, the camaraderie, it all served to give their lives structure and meaning. But now that it is gone, they are left with the raw, disorienting reality of a world without the structure they had grown accustomed to. The sense of belonging that once provided them with a purpose and direction is replaced with a profound void, one that is difficult to fill. The collapse of the society leaves its survivors grappling with the question of who they are without the organization. The loss is not merely a loss of a group or a mission. It is a loss of self. Many of them had built their lives around the society's values, goals, and promises. Their identities were intricately linked to the ideals they had embraced, the secrets they had sworn to protect, and the bonds they had formed with their fellow members. But now that the foundation has crumbled, they are forced to confront a harsh and often painful truth. Without the society, they no longer know who they are. For years, they had worked toward a collective vision, driven by a common cause. But now that cause is gone, and they must figure out how to live in a world that no longer aligns with their former worldview. This identity crisis is compounded by the emotional and psychological scars left behind by the society's collapse. The trauma of betrayal, the pain of seeing everything they had worked for crumble in front of their eyes, leaves a deep and lasting imprint on the survivors. For many, the wounds are not just emotional but psychological. They feel as though their entire worldview has been shattered, and in its place is nothing but confusion and uncertainty. The principles that had once guided them, loyalty, secrecy, honor, now feel hollow and meaningless. They had devoted themselves to these ideals, often at great personal cost, only to see them undone by the very people they had trusted. It is a betrayal not only by their fellow members but also by the very system they had believed in. The sense of loss is compounded by the fact that many survivors feel a deep sense of shame. They were once part of something powerful and mysterious, something that seemed to promise a greater understanding of the world. But now that it is gone, they are left to wonder whether it was all a lie, whether the truth they had been seeking was ever worth the price they paid. The survivors are often caught between two opposing forces: the desire to move on, to leave the past behind, and the deep-rooted pull of what they once had. Some try to push forward, to carve out new paths for themselves, while others find themselves mired in the past, unable to let go of the memories of what was. The former members who try to move on may seek out new causes or communities, but they often find it difficult to fully integrate into the world outside. The ideals that once defined them are so deeply ingrained in their psyche that it is difficult to simply walk away from them. They may try to live a normal life, but it feels shallow and unsatisfying. There is a sense of something missing, something fundamental that they cannot quite put their finger on. No matter how hard they try, they cannot shake the feeling that they are living in the shadow of something greater, something that no longer exists. On the other hand, those who are unable to move on may become increasingly obsessed with the past. They cling to the memories of the society, to the ideals and goals that once defined them, even as those ideals fade into obscurity. These individuals often find themselves living in a state of nostalgia, constantly reflecting on what was lost and what could have been. The collapse becomes an anchor, holding them in place, preventing them from moving forward. They are stuck in a cycle of regret and longing, wishing for a return to the way things were. But this is a futile exercise. The past is gone, and no amount of yearning will bring it back. And yet, the survivors continue to chase it, hoping to reclaim something that no longer exists. This fixation on the past often leads to a sense of bitterness and frustration. The survivors are consumed by what could have been, but they cannot seem to find a way to make peace with the reality of what is. The emotional impact of this loss is further amplified by the way in which the society's collapse has affected the relationships among its survivors. The once strong bonds of trust and loyalty are now tainted by betrayal and suspicion. The people they once considered family have become strangers, each one dealing with the fallout in their own way. Some may have turned their backs on the others, unable to forgive the betrayals that took place within the society. Others may find themselves drifting apart, unable to bridge the emotional distance that has grown between them. Even those who try to rebuild their relationships often find themselves struggling to reconnect. The shared experiences that once brought them together are now the very things that keep them apart. It is difficult to look at someone who was once a trusted ally and not see the scars of betrayal, the emotional baggage that now hangs over every conversation, every interaction. At the heart of this disconnection lies the reality that the society, in its final moments, had been a microcosm of the world's darker tendencies. The very forces that tore the society apart, the infighting, the greed, the ambition, the fear, are forces that exist in the wider world as well. The survivors are now faced with the daunting task of confronting the same forces that had once destroyed the society. They must now navigate a world that, in many ways, mirrors the internal chaos they experienced within the society. Trust is no longer something that comes easily. They are hyper-aware of the fragility of human relationships and the potential for betrayal that exists in every corner of life. The scars of the society's collapse have made them skeptical of the world around them, and they are constantly questioning the motives of those they meet. The ideals of loyalty and trust, which were once so sacred, now seem like empty promises, words that are easily broken and betrayed. In addition to these emotional challenges, there is also the very real struggle of rebuilding their lives in a world that no longer feels like home. For many of the survivors, the society was not just a community. It was their refuge, their escape from a world they did not understand. Now, that refuge is gone, and they are left to face the world as it is. The security and structure that the society had provided are no longer there. The world outside is full of chaos, competition, and uncertainty, and the survivors are ill-prepared to navigate it. They feel lost, disconnected, and adrift, unsure of where to go or what to do. For those who had once been part of a tightly knit, purpose-driven group, the transition to a life of solitude or integration into the outside world is jarring and painful. For some, the collapse of the society marks the end of any further involvement in secretive or elite groups. They are unwilling to be part of anything that even remotely resembles what they once experienced. The idea of joining another organization, another group with its own set of ideals, seems unappealing, even dangerous. They have seen firsthand the destructive potential of such groups, and they are unwilling to repeat the same mistakes. Instead, they may seek to live more quietly, focusing on personal growth or trying to find peace outside the world of secrets and power struggles. For them, the collapse of the society is a warning, a cautionary tale that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Others, however, may find themselves drawn back into the shadows, pulled by the same forces that once defined their lives. They may seek out new organizations or causes, driven by the same desire for purpose and meaning that led them to the society in the first place. The allure of secret knowledge, the promise of power, and the thrill of belonging to something larger than themselves may be too strong to resist. For these individuals, the collapse of the society does not mark the end but the beginning of a new chapter. They may try to rebuild what was lost, to create something new out of the ashes of the old. But even as they attempt to revive the ideals of the past, they are forever haunted by the knowledge that they are repeating the same patterns of ambition and secrecy that led to the society's destruction. Regardless of how they choose to move forward, the survivors are irrevocably changed by the collapse of the society. The loss of identity, the emotional scars, the broken relationships, and the struggle to rebuild all serve as reminders of the fragility of human connections and the dangers of blind loyalty. The collapse is not just the end of a secret society. It is a reminder that nothing is permanent, and that even the most seemingly invincible structures can fall. The survivors are left to pick up the pieces of their lives and rebuild, but they are forever marked by the events that led to their downfall. The past may be gone, but its influence remains, shaping their futures in ways they cannot yet fully comprehend. As the survivors of the secret society continue to struggle with the aftermath of its collapse, one of the most pervasive feelings that creeps in is the slow realization that they are no longer part of something larger than themselves. What once gave their lives meaning, purpose, and direction, the unity of shared goals, the thrill of hidden knowledge, and the bond of secrecy, is gone. The community they had once believed to be a source of power and protection now feels like a distant memory, leaving them feeling adrift in a world that suddenly feels alien. The loss is profound not just in terms of the organization itself, but in the emotional and psychological toll it takes on those who were once its members. The collapse is not just the dissolution of a group. It is the collapse of the self, the destruction of the very core of who they were. In the early days after the fall, there is often a sense of disbelief. It's as though they are waiting for someone to wake them from a nightmare, hoping that the society they had devoted so much of their lives to will somehow be restored. But as time passes, the reality begins to set in, and with it comes a deep, existential crisis. For years, they had adhered to the belief that they were part of something greater, an organization that, despite its flaws, was still working toward a greater good, a higher purpose. Now, that purpose has evaporated, leaving behind only a void. The ideals they once cherished, the principles they swore to uphold, now seem meaningless in the face of the destruction they have witnessed. The question that looms large is one that cannot be easily answered. How do you rebuild when everything you once believed in has crumbled? The psychological toll of this collapse is not something that can be easily quantified. For many, the sense of loss is overwhelming, and the emotional scars are deep. The betrayal they experienced, often from people they had trusted with their lives, is something they can't shake. The very foundation of their belief system has been ripped away, and in its place is a growing sense of disillusionment. They are left to ask themselves, what was the point of everything? Was it worth it? Were the sacrifices they made for the society, time, energy, loyalty, and trust, really worth it in the end? These are not easy questions to answer, and for many survivors, they may never find a satisfying answer. The collapse of the society is not just a loss of a group or an institution. It is a loss of a way of life. For many, the society was their family, their identity, their entire world. The rituals, the ceremonies, the secrets, they all served as a framework for their lives. Without the society, they find themselves at a loss. What do you do when the thing that defined you no longer exists? Who are you when the ideals that once guided you are revealed to be hollow? These questions plague the survivors as they attempt to piece together the fragments of their former lives. The loss of identity is often the most difficult aspect of the collapse. It is as though they are being forced to reinvent themselves from scratch, to find new purpose and meaning in a world that no longer feels like home. For some survivors, the loss of the society leads to a search for new meaning elsewhere. They may seek out new organizations, new causes, new communities that promise the same sense of purpose and belonging that the society once gave them. But often, these new pursuits fail to satisfy the deep yearning they feel. The society was more than just an organization, it was a way of life. And now, nothing can replace that. The survivors may try to replicate the sense of unity and purpose they once had, but it is like trying to fill a void that cannot be filled. The ideals they once believed in have been shattered, and they find themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the world, about power, about loyalty, and about truth. Others may retreat inward, choosing to live more solitary lives. The collapse of the society has left them with a profound sense of distrust, not just toward others but toward themselves. They are no longer sure of their own judgment, their own beliefs, or their own place in the world. This deep sense of uncertainty drives many survivors to withdraw from the world around them. The world they once thought they could trust, the world of secrets, oaths, and shared knowledge, has proven to be nothing more than an illusion. And now, they are left to navigate a world that feels fragmented, disconnected, and ultimately untrustworthy. The isolation that follows is both a coping mechanism and a consequence of the collapse. They don't want to risk being hurt again, and so they keep to themselves, building walls around their hearts and minds. This emotional and psychological isolation is exacerbated by the fact that the survivors can no longer find solace in their former comrades. The people who had once been their closest allies, their brothers and sisters in arms, are now strangers. The trust they once shared has been shattered, and in its place is a sense of suspicion, guilt, and resentment. The very people who were once their family are now the source of their pain. Some survivors may harbor deep feelings of betrayal toward their former comrades, believing that they were abandoned or sold out when the society began to unravel. Others may blame themselves for not seeing the warning signs, for not doing enough to prevent the collapse. These feelings of guilt and anger can eat away at the survivors, preventing them from healing and moving forward. For those who do not turn inward, the search for new purpose often leads them back to the very forces that led to the collapse of the society in the first place. Some survivors may find themselves drawn to other secretive organizations or movements, seeking out a new sense of belonging and meaning. But these new groups are rarely the answer. They often replicate the same flaws that led to the downfall of the original society: greed, corruption, and betrayal. The survivors, having learned from their past experiences, may try to resist these temptations, but the pull of power, secrecy, and influence is a powerful one. It is difficult to break free from the patterns that shaped their lives for so long, and many find themselves caught in a cycle of searching for something that may not even exist anymore. The collapse of the society also forces its former members to confront the broader implications of their involvement. The secrets they kept, the lies they told, the power they wielded, what was it all for? Was the pursuit of knowledge, power, and influence worth the cost? These are questions that linger in the minds of the survivors long after the society has fallen. The world around them may have moved on, but they are left to grapple with the reality of what they have lost, what they have given up, and what they have become. The question of whether they can ever truly escape their past is one that haunts them, especially when they are faced with the consequences of their involvement. The knowledge they once thought of as sacred now feels like a burden, something they can never truly rid themselves of. Even as they try to move on, they are reminded of the price they paid for their participation in the society. For some, the collapse is a moment of personal reckoning, a time to reflect on the choices they made and the path they took. It forces them to confront their own motivations, their own desires, and their own capacity for complicity. The ideals they once believed in, the lofty goals they once held, now seem naive and misguided. They begin to question whether they were ever truly aligned with the society's original purpose, or if they had been blinded by ambition, ego, or the allure of power. This self-examination is painful but ultimately necessary. It is only by coming to terms with their past that the survivors can hope to find peace and move forward. For others, the collapse marks the beginning of a deeper transformation. The emotional wounds may never fully heal, and the scars of betrayal and loss may remain for the rest of their lives. But there is an opportunity for growth and change. The collapse has shattered their former understanding of the world, and now they must rebuild it from the ground up. They must learn to live without the crutch of secrecy and power, to find meaning in the everyday, and to redefine themselves in a world that no longer revolves around the society's ideals. This process is neither quick nor easy, but it is the only path forward. It is a slow, painful journey of self-discovery and redemption, one that requires them to confront their own flaws and accept their role in the society's downfall. But in this acceptance, there is the possibility of renewal, of rebuilding not just their lives, but their sense of purpose. As they move through this difficult process, the survivors come to understand a crucial truth. The collapse of the society, while devastating, has given them an opportunity to start over. The world they once knew may be gone, but it is also a world they no longer need. They are free from the constraints of the organization, free from the lies and illusions that once bound them. They have the chance to forge their own path, to live authentically and without the weight of the past hanging over them. It is a daunting prospect, but it is also one filled with possibility. The collapse, in the end, is not just an end, but a beginning, a chance for the survivors to redefine themselves and create a new life, one that is not defined by the society's fall, but by the choices they make in the aftermath. In the wake of the collapse, the survivors are left to face a world that has irrevocably changed, both in their perception and in the broader scope of history. The once powerful institution they had devoted their lives to is now a shadow of what it once was, and with it, the sense of certainty and purpose that had defined their existence is gone. As the survivors sift through the rubble of their former lives, they begin to realize that they are not just dealing with the loss of a group, but the loss of a world, one that had given their lives meaning, direction, and a shared sense of identity. The collapse is not just an event that marks the end of an era. It is the shattering of the very framework upon which they had built their lives. The survivors often struggle with a profound sense of isolation, as if they have been cast adrift in an ocean of uncertainty. The bonds they once shared with their fellow members are now fractured, either broken by betrayal or irreparably weakened by the collapse itself. Many of them find themselves alone, disconnected from a world that no longer seems to understand them. In their search for meaning, they are confronted by a vast, empty space where the society once stood. They cannot simply return to the lives they led before. They have been changed by the experiences they went through and by the knowledge and secrets they now carry. The society's collapse has irrevocably altered them, leaving them to grapple with an internal transformation that mirrors the external one. The world they once knew is gone, and in its place is a chaotic, uncertain landscape that feels like a foreign place. The emotional weight of this transformation is immense. The survivors are not just mourning the loss of a group or a cause. They are mourning the loss of themselves. They were once part of something larger than themselves, a force that promised power, purpose, and protection. Now that the society has fallen, they are left to pick up the pieces of their own shattered identities. The trust they once placed in the organization, in the rituals and the shared beliefs, has been eroded, and they are left to wonder if any of it was real. The collapse reveals the fragility of the system they had believed in, and this realization is often more painful than the collapse itself. The survivors cannot help but question their own judgment, wondering if they had been manipulated or if they had simply failed to see the warning signs in time. The guilt and shame that accompany this realization can be overwhelming, and many survivors find themselves trapped in a cycle of self-blame, unable to escape the feeling that they were complicit in the downfall. As they process this emotional turmoil, many survivors struggle with a profound sense of betrayal. The society that had once promised loyalty, solidarity, and mutual support now feels like a distant, hollow memory. The people they had trusted the most, their closest allies and friends, are no longer there, and the trust they once shared has been shattered. The betrayal is not just about the collapse itself. It is about the way in which the society was revealed to be built on secrets, lies, and deception. The survivors are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that the very ideals they had been fighting for were tainted by corruption, greed, and the desire for power. The leaders they had once revered now seem like puppets, manipulating those beneath them for their own gain. The society's fall, once seen as a tragic event, is now seen as an inevitable consequence of the very forces that had driven its creation. This sense of betrayal runs deep, and it affects not just the relationships among the survivors but their relationship with the outside world. The collapse of the society has left a lasting scar on their worldview, and they now approach the world with a sense of skepticism and suspicion. They cannot simply return to the lives they once had, and the people they meet are often viewed through a lens of distrust. Every interaction feels loaded with meaning, and every word spoken is dissected for hidden motives. They question the sincerity of those around them, wondering if anyone can truly be trusted. This heightened sense of suspicion creates an emotional distance between them and the world they now inhabit. Even when they try to form new relationships, there is an invisible barrier between them and others, built from the remnants of their past experiences. They cannot shake the feeling that they are living in a world full of falsehoods, where trust is a rare commodity and betrayal lurks just beneath the surface. In the search for answers, the survivors often find themselves questioning the very nature of the world they now find themselves in. The collapse has shattered their belief in the idea of a just moral world, where power is used for good and where individuals are rewarded for their loyalty and commitment. They are left to face the harsh reality that the world is far more complex and corrupt than they had ever imagined. The ideals they once clung to, honor, integrity, loyalty, now seem naive and outdated in the face of the world's chaos. The survivors are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their former organization was a reflection of the very forces they had once sought to overcome. The pursuit of power, the manipulation of secrets, and the desire for control were all inherent in the society's structure, and it is this very structure that ultimately led to its downfall. The realization that they were a part of this corrupt system can be crushing, leaving the survivors to wonder if they can ever truly be free of it. This internal struggle is compounded by the fact that the world outside has moved on, indifferent to their suffering. The collapse of the society is, for the outside world, just another news story, another forgotten scandal in a long list of similar events. The survivors are left to pick up the pieces of their lives while the world around them continues as if nothing has changed. This sense of abandonment is isolating, and it deepens the emotional void that the survivors feel. The world does not understand their pain, and they cannot find solace in the people around them. The isolation is profound, as if they are living in a parallel universe, one where they are the only ones left to bear the weight of the collapse. This sense of loneliness is perhaps the most enduring consequence of the society's fall. It is not just the loss of the society itself, but the realization that they are now cut off from the world they once knew. In the absence of the society, many survivors are left to rebuild their lives. But this process is neither simple nor straightforward. The collapse has left them with deep emotional scars, and the trauma of betrayal and loss is not something that can be easily erased. For some, the process of rebuilding means returning to the very things they once left behind, the relationships, the communities, the values they once held dear. They may try to reconnect with old friends, to rebuild the trust that was lost, but this is often a slow and painful process. The emotional wounds are deep, and trust is not something that can be regained overnight. The survivors must confront the possibility that they may never be able to fully heal, that the scars of the past will always be with them. But even in this recognition, there is a glimmer of hope. The process of rebuilding, while painful, offers the possibility of growth and renewal. It is a chance for the survivors to redefine themselves, to create new identities based on the lessons they have learned from their past experiences. For others, the process of rebuilding means turning their back on the past entirely. They may seek new causes, new communities, and new values to replace what was lost. The collapse has taught them that loyalty and secrecy can be dangerous, and they may now reject the very ideals that once defined them. Instead, they may seek out a more individualistic, less dependent way of life, one where they are not bound by the constraints of loyalty or secrecy. This desire for freedom is understandable, but it is also a reaction to the trauma they have experienced. It is a way of asserting control over their lives, of breaking free from the chains of the past. But even in their rejection of the old ways, the survivors cannot escape the lessons of the past. They are forever shaped by the collapse, and the choices they make in the future will always be influenced by the experiences they went through. In the end, the survivors of the collapse are left to wrestle with the complex emotional and psychological aftermath of their involvement in the society. They must come to terms with the fact that the world they once knew is gone, and with it, their place in it. The collapse is not just a loss of an institution. It is the loss of a way of life, a loss of purpose, and a loss of self. It is a painful, disorienting process, but it also offers the possibility of transformation. The survivors must learn to rebuild their lives, not by returning to the past, but by creating something new, something that is more resilient, more authentic, and more grounded in reality. It is a difficult journey, but it is one that offers the possibility of redemption and renewal. The collapse of the society may mark the end of one chapter, but it also marks the beginning of another, a chance for the survivors to redefine themselves and their place in the world. In the aftermath of the collapse, as the dust settles and the survivors come to terms with the wreckage of what was once a powerful, tightly knit organization, a new wave of realization begins to take root. This moment, as painful and disorienting as it may be, is also a critical point for reflection and self-discovery. For many of the survivors, the question they now face is not just how to rebuild their lives, but whether it is even possible to rebuild the life they once had. The collapse has revealed the fragility of everything they held dear, the secrets, the trust, the power, each one exposed as vulnerable to the very human failings they had once sought to transcend. This revelation is often accompanied by a profound sense of loss, but it also presents an opportunity for change and personal growth, one that can only emerge after the ashes have settled. As the survivors confront the emotional aftermath of betrayal and loss, they are forced to reckon with a bitter truth. They were not as invincible as they once believed. The society, which had once felt indestructible, was shown to be just as fragile as its members, built on a web of secrets, power struggles, and idealistic ambitions that were ultimately its undoing. But it was more than just a collapse of an institution. It was a collapse of a worldview, one that had governed their actions and decisions for years. This disillusionment is painful, as it forces the survivors to question the very core of their beliefs. The promises that the society made, promises of protection, of belonging, of access to higher knowledge, are now seen as hollow. The idealistic vision that had inspired their devotion has been shattered, and in its place, they are left with the raw reality of what the society truly was. A group of flawed individuals, all seeking power and control, bound together by shared secrets and collective ambition. This realization, while painful, is also a turning point. It is a moment when the survivors are forced to face themselves, to confront their own roles within the society, and to acknowledge their complicity in the rise and fall of an institution that now feels like a distant, mythical memory. The knowledge that they were part of something so flawed, so riddled with corruption and manipulation, is both humbling and unsettling. It makes them wonder how much of their lives, their choices, were truly their own and how much was influenced by the ideals of the society. Were they ever truly in control, or had they been swept along by the collective current of ambition and secrecy? The questions swirl in their minds, leaving them feeling both vulnerable and lost. For many survivors, the road ahead is not just about rebuilding what was lost. It is about rebuilding themselves from the inside out. In the face of these profound questions, some survivors turn to introspection, attempting to understand who they are outside of the context of the society. For so long, their identities were intertwined with the organization and its ideals. They were defined by their roles within it, by the sense of purpose it gave them, and by the relationships they formed with their fellow members. But now, with that identity stripped away, they are left with nothing but a void. It is as though they have to rediscover who they are, what they stand for, and where they belong in a world that feels unfamiliar and unsettling. This process of self-discovery is neither quick nor easy. It is marked by moments of doubt, confusion, and frustration as they attempt to reconcile their past with their present. The people they once were, the idealistic, driven individuals who believed in the mission of the society, now feel like strangers to them. They must come to terms with the fact that their identity has been irrevocably changed, and that the world they once inhabited is no longer the same. For some survivors, this moment of reckoning leads to a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the world. They begin to recognize the flaws in their former beliefs and the limitations of the world they had once inhabited. They see that the pursuit of power and knowledge, when driven by ambition and secrecy, is ultimately hollow. The collapse of the society serves as a painful but necessary lesson, that no amount of power, no amount of influence, can guarantee stability or fulfillment. They come to realize that their lives, like the society itself, were built on fragile foundations. The collapse forces them to redefine what it means to live a meaningful life. The ideals they once clung to, loyalty, secrecy, and power, are now seen as transient, and the pursuit of these ideals is ultimately destructive. In their place, the survivors begin to seek out new values, values grounded in personal growth, authenticity, and human connection. For others, however, the collapse is not so easily reconciled. The trauma of betrayal, the disillusionment, and the loss of purpose can be too much to bear. They may find themselves spiraling into despair, unable to break free from the psychological and emotional weight of their past. The knowledge that they were part of something so corrupted, so deeply flawed, becomes a constant reminder of their own complicity. The guilt they feel for having been involved, for having trusted the wrong people, becomes a weight they cannot escape. They may try to bury these feelings, to ignore them, but they persist, gnawing at their conscience. This emotional baggage can manifest in many ways. In anxiety, in distrust of others, in a deep sense of alienation from the world around them. They may find it difficult to form new relationships, unable to shake the fear that they will once again be betrayed. They may withdraw from the world entirely, choosing to live in isolation, unable to face the world that feels foreign and hostile. In either case, the collapse of the society forces the survivors to confront their own limitations and to reevaluate the choices they made. It is a journey that requires them to peel back the layers of their former selves and examine the beliefs and motivations that guided them. It is a process of self-reflection that can be both liberating and painful. As they come to terms with the disillusionment they feel, many survivors begin to understand that their former lives were not as perfect as they once thought. The ideals of the society were not infallible. They were simply ideas, constructed by imperfect people who were just as prone to ambition, greed, and selfishness as anyone else. The realization that the society was not a beacon of righteousness but a reflection of human flaws is a sobering one. It forces the survivors to come to terms with the fact that they, too, were part of the problem. At the same time, the survivors begin to understand that the collapse, as devastating as it was, has also freed them from the shackles of the society. They are no longer bound by the need to conform to its ideals, no longer tied to a group that was ultimately built on deception and manipulation. In this freedom, there is both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is the chance to forge their own path, to create a life that is no longer defined by the secrets of the past. The challenge is that, without the society, they are left to navigate a world that is unfamiliar and uncertain. They must learn to find meaning and purpose outside of the context of the group that once gave them direction. The world, once filled with clarity and certainty, is now filled with ambiguity and complexity. It is a daunting task, but it is also one that offers the possibility of true freedom. Freedom from the constraints of the past, freedom from the expectations of others, and freedom to create their own future. As they move forward, the survivors must learn to build new relationships, new communities, and new goals that are grounded in authenticity and trust. They can no longer rely on the illusion of loyalty and secrecy that once defined their lives. Instead, they must learn to connect with others in more meaningful, open ways. This is no easy task, as the scars of the past still run deep. Trust is no longer something that comes easily, and the fear of betrayal lingers in every new interaction. But the survivors understand that rebuilding their lives means learning to trust again, to take risks, and to open themselves up to new possibilities. It is a slow and difficult process, but it is the only way forward. They must learn that true strength does not come from power or control, but from the ability to connect with others in genuine, human ways. The collapse of the society, while tragic and painful, is ultimately a transformative experience for the survivors. It forces them to confront the truth about themselves, about their former lives, and about the world they once inhabited. The journey ahead is one of self-discovery and growth, as they learn to rebuild their lives from the ground up. It is a journey that requires them to shed the illusions of the past, to let go of the ideals that once defined them, and to embrace a new, more authentic version of themselves. While the scars of the past will never fully fade, the survivors come to understand that their future is not defined by the society's collapse. Instead, they have the power to shape their own destinies, to create lives that are no longer dependent on the structures and illusions of the past. It is a painful process, but it is also one filled with hope and possibility, as the survivors begin to build a future that is truly their own. As the survivors continue to process the fallout from the collapse, they find themselves at the crossroads of two distinct but deeply intertwined paths: the desire to leave behind the past and the need to confront it head-on. For many, the urge to move on from the trauma of their former lives is overwhelming, a natural reaction to the emotional and psychological wounds that the society's collapse inflicted upon them. They long for a sense of peace, a respite from the chaos, and the freedom to forge new lives that are not defined by their past affiliations. The yearning to leave the dark chapter of their lives behind is understandable, but it often comes at a cost. In their efforts to escape the ghosts of the past, many of the survivors find that they are simply running from the very things they need to confront if they are to ever truly heal. The temptation to shut the door on the past, to walk away and never look back, can be powerful, but it is ultimately an illusion, a way of avoiding the painful process of coming to terms with the truth. In the early stages after the collapse, some survivors attempt to rebuild their lives by seeking refuge in new environments or relationships, trying to erase the memories of their past with a sense of normalcy and fresh starts. They may try to immerse themselves in new communities, adopting new identities that are separate from the one they had built within the society. These attempts to escape are often short-lived, however. Despite their best efforts, the memories of the society, the experiences they had, and the emotional baggage they carry are never far from the surface. No matter how far they try to run, they are haunted by the knowledge of what they were once a part of, and by the knowledge of what they lost. The ghosts of their past follow them, subtly but persistently, in everything they do. Every new relationship they form, every new environment they try to settle into, becomes tainted by the unresolved trauma of their past. The desire to start anew is understandable, but it is not a solution to the deeper issues they face. On the other side, there are those who find that the collapse has forced them into a painful but necessary period of reflection. They cannot simply leave the past behind, as much as they may wish to. Instead, they are confronted by the need to examine their own involvement in the society's rise and fall. This process is deeply uncomfortable, for it requires the survivors to accept the uncomfortable truths that they had once ignored or suppressed. The collapse has stripped away the illusions that once protected them, and they are now forced to confront the fact that they were not simply innocent victims of a corrupt system. They were active participants in that system, complicit in its actions, its secrets, and its ultimate downfall. The betrayal they feel is not only directed at the society and its leaders but at themselves, as they come to terms with their own role in perpetuating a system that was ultimately built on deception and manipulation. This process of self-examination is neither quick nor easy. It is marked by deep emotional turmoil, as the survivors wrestle with guilt, shame, and regret. They question their own motivations, their choices, and the values that they once held so dearly. Were they driven by ambition, by a desire for power, or was it something deeper, something more insidious? Many survivors are shocked to realize just how much they were willing to sacrifice in order to maintain their place within the society, to protect its secrets, to follow its leaders, to uphold its ideals, even when those ideals began to crumble. The betrayal they feel is not just about the collapse of the society. It is about the realization that they had been part of a system that was, at its core, dishonest and manipulative. They had believed in the righteousness of their cause, only to discover that it was built on lies. The trauma of this realization is often more profound than the collapse itself, for it forces the survivors to question the very foundation of their own identities. The survivors, in their efforts to rebuild their lives, often struggle with the question of how to reconcile the idealistic beliefs they once held with the reality of their actions. Many of them had entered the society with a sense of purpose and conviction, driven by the belief that they were part of something greater than themselves. The knowledge they had sought, the power they had accumulated, the secrets they had shared, they had all been a means to an end, a way of contributing to a greater cause. But in the wake of the collapse, those very ideals seem hollow. The noble purpose they had once believed in is now tainted by the realization that their involvement in the society was not an act of moral righteousness, but a pursuit of personal gain and power. This disillusionment is painful, for it forces them to confront the fact that they were not heroes or martyrs but, in many ways, victims of their own ambitions. Despite the pain, this moment of reckoning can also serve as the beginning of a new chapter for the survivors. The process of coming to terms with their past, while difficult, offers the opportunity for growth and transformation. It is only through confronting the mistakes of the past that they can hope to build a future that is grounded in authenticity and self-awareness. They must learn to accept their past, no matter how flawed, and to make peace with the fact that they were once part of something that, in the end, failed. But making peace with this truth is not easy. It requires a level of humility and introspection that many of them have never had to confront before. It requires them to acknowledge the parts of themselves that they would rather forget, the moments of weakness, the choices they regret, the ways in which they contributed to the corruption of the society they had once sworn to protect. For many survivors, the hardest part of this process is learning to forgive themselves. The guilt they feel is overwhelming, and the shame they carry with them is a constant reminder of their perceived failures. The emotional weight of their past actions makes it difficult to move forward, and they are often consumed by a sense of self-loathing. How could they have been so blind, so complicit, so easily manipulated? The questions torment them, leaving them feeling paralyzed and unable to take the steps necessary for healing. But in order to move on, they must learn to forgive themselves. They must understand that while they may have made mistakes, they are not defined by those mistakes. They are not the sum of their worst decisions. Learning to forgive themselves is not about excusing their actions or erasing the past. It is about accepting their humanity, their imperfections, and their ability to grow. This process of self-forgiveness is often accompanied by a desire to make amends, to right the wrongs they have committed, to restore the relationships they have damaged, and to rebuild the trust they have lost. But this is not always possible. The collapse has irrevocably changed the dynamics between the survivors, and many of the relationships that once existed within the society are beyond repair. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, and the emotional scars left by the betrayal are often too deep to heal. In some cases, the survivors find that the best way to make amends is to move forward, to live their lives with integrity and self-awareness, to act in ways that reflect their newfound understanding of themselves and the world around them. They may not be able to undo the damage they caused, but they can strive to do better moving forward. This journey towards self-forgiveness and redemption is not easy, and it is not linear. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when the survivors feel as though they are trapped in the same cycle of pain and regret. But with time, many of them begin to realize that healing is not about erasing the past, but about integrating it into their lives in a way that allows them to move forward. The scars of the past may never fully fade, but they can become part of the fabric of who they are, reminders of the lessons they have learned, the growth they have achieved, and the strength they have found in overcoming adversity. The collapse of the society, for all the trauma it caused, is ultimately a catalyst for change. It forces the survivors to confront the parts of themselves they had long ignored, to reevaluate their values, and to rebuild their lives on a more solid foundation. They may never fully escape the consequences of their involvement, but in facing the truth of their past, they are given the opportunity to create a future that is more authentic, more grounded in reality, and more aligned with their true selves. This journey is not easy, and it is often marked by pain, regret, and struggle. But it is also a journey of redemption, a chance to take responsibility for the past, to forgive themselves, and to rebuild their lives on their own terms. The collapse was not just the end of the society. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was theirs to write. As the survivors begin to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, they are faced with a daunting reality. The collapse of the secret society has not only disrupted their sense of identity but also severed their connection to the world they once thought they knew. They are no longer part of an institution that promised protection, purpose, or enlightenment. Instead, they are cast adrift in a sea of uncertainty, struggling to make sense of their place in a world that now seems far more complicated and hostile. In the wake of this disintegration, they must navigate the world with a new set of eyes, one that is forever altered by the secrets they have learned and the truths they have uncovered. The sense of belonging they once felt is gone, leaving them vulnerable and exposed in ways they never imagined possible. One of the most profound challenges the survivors face is the overwhelming sense of betrayal, not just by the society's leaders, but by themselves. They cannot help but feel complicit in the downfall of the organization, even if they were not directly responsible for its corruption. The disillusionment that follows is not simply about the loss of the group or its ideals, but about the realization that they were part of something far darker than they had ever imagined. The promises they were once made of a higher purpose, of power, of being part of something greater than themselves, now seem empty, hollow. The ideals they had subscribed to, the vows they had taken, all appear to be nothing more than a facade, a convenient illusion designed to keep them in line, to keep them loyal. The truth, once hidden behind layers of secrecy and manipulation, is now laid bare. The survivors are left to confront a bitter reality. Their involvement in the society was never about justice, or truth, or higher knowledge. It was about power and control, about individuals exploiting the trust and loyalty of others for their own gain. The society they had once worshipped, the institution that had seemed so noble, was built on lies. And now that it has collapsed, the survivors are left to pick up the shattered remnants of their former beliefs, trying to make sense of the ruins. In the aftermath of such a collapse, many survivors are forced to ask themselves difficult questions. What was it all for? Was the pursuit of power, knowledge, or influence worth the price they paid? How did they allow themselves to become so deeply entangled in a system that ultimately betrayed them? These questions gnaw at the survivors, and they find it difficult to silence the voice inside them that wonders if they were ever truly in control of their own choices. The guilt they feel is compounded by the knowledge that the society's downfall has far-reaching consequences that extend beyond their own personal grief. The damage caused by the collapse is not just emotional or psychological. It is also social, political, and cultural. The secrecy, the manipulation, and the corruption that permeated the society are not confined to the walls of the organization. They have infiltrated the wider world, leaving behind a trail of chaos and uncertainty. As the survivors look around them, they begin to understand the full extent of the destruction they were a part of. The ripples of the society's collapse are still being felt, and the survivors are left to wonder if they will ever be able to move beyond the shadow of their past involvement. In their quest for answers, many of the survivors turn inward, seeking solace in self-reflection and self-discovery. They realize that the collapse of the society has forced them into a position where they must redefine their own sense of self. For so long, they had been defined by their membership in the group, by the oaths they took, by the rituals they participated in, and by the shared belief that they were part of something greater than themselves. Now that those beliefs have been shattered, they are left to rebuild their sense of identity from the ground up. The journey of self-discovery is not an easy one, as it forces them to confront the parts of themselves they had long ignored or suppressed. It requires them to examine their motivations, their desires, and their capacity for self-deception. The survivors must come to terms with the fact that they were not simply innocent victims of circumstance. They were active participants in a system that was, at its core, flawed and corrupt. This realization is painful, but it is also liberating, for it opens the door to a new kind of freedom. The freedom to redefine themselves, to find new meaning and purpose outside the constraints of the society. For some survivors, this journey of self-discovery leads to a new understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. They come to recognize that the pursuit of power, knowledge, or influence, when driven by ambition and secrecy, ultimately leads to emptiness and disillusionment. They begin to seek out new values, ones that are grounded in honesty, authenticity, and personal growth. These new values are not based on the need for external validation or approval, but on an internal sense of purpose that transcends the pursuit of power. The survivors begin to understand that true fulfillment does not come from manipulating others or controlling the flow of information. It comes from genuine human connection, from the ability to live with integrity, and from the courage to face the world with openness and vulnerability. For others, however, the journey is less straightforward. The emotional scars of their involvement in the society run deep, and the process of healing is long and difficult. The guilt they feel is pervasive, and they often find themselves trapped in a cycle of self-blame. They cannot escape the feeling that they were complicit in the destruction of something that was once beautiful, that they allowed themselves to be deceived, or worse, that they were active participants in the very system that led to their downfall. These survivors often struggle with a profound sense of shame, and they find it difficult to forgive themselves for their perceived failings. The emotional weight of their actions becomes a constant reminder of their past mistakes, and they are left to question whether they will ever be able to move beyond the pain. Despite the difficulty, this journey of self-forgiveness is essential if they are to heal. The survivors must come to terms with the fact that they are not perfect, that they made mistakes, that they were driven by flaws, and that they participated in something that was ultimately destructive. But they must also understand that they are more than the sum of their worst actions. They must learn to forgive themselves, not because their actions were excusable, but because self-forgiveness is the first step toward healing and growth. Without this forgiveness, the survivors will remain trapped in the past, unable to move forward. It is a difficult lesson, but it is one that is necessary for the survivors to embrace if they are ever to find peace. In the midst of this personal struggle, many survivors begin to find solace in their relationships with others. While the collapse has severed many of the bonds they once shared with their fellow members of the society, it has also created an opportunity for new connections. These new relationships are not based on secrecy or shared ambition, but on mutual understanding and empathy. The survivors begin to form deep, authentic connections with others who have faced similar challenges, and in doing so, they find a sense of community that is grounded in honesty and trust. These new relationships provide them with the emotional support they need to heal, and they help to reaffirm the idea that true strength comes not from power or control, but from the ability to connect with others in meaningful ways. The journey toward healing and self-discovery is not an easy one, and it is often marked by setbacks and moments of doubt. The emotional scars of the past are not easily erased, and the memories of betrayal and loss continue to haunt the survivors. But as time passes, they begin to understand that healing is not a linear process. It is a journey of ups and downs, of moments of clarity and moments of doubt, of progress and setbacks. They begin to see that healing is not about forgetting the past, but about integrating it into their lives in a way that allows them to move forward. The survivors may never fully escape the emotional weight of their involvement in the society, but they can learn to live with it, to find peace despite it, and to build a future that is not defined by their past mistakes. The collapse of the society, while devastating, ultimately provides the survivors with an opportunity for personal growth and transformation. It forces them to confront their own flaws, to reevaluate their values, and to redefine their understanding of power, purpose, and identity. The journey ahead is not easy, but it is one that offers the possibility of redemption, of finding new meaning and purpose outside the walls of the society. The survivors may never be the same people they were before the collapse, but in many ways that is a good thing. They have been given a chance to rebuild themselves, to learn from their mistakes, and to create new lives that are grounded in authenticity, integrity, and human connection. It is a painful process, but it is also one filled with hope. The collapse of the society was not just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that they have the power to shape for themselves. As the survivors begin to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of the collapse, they are faced with a harsh truth. The world they now occupy is vastly different from the one they once knew. The fall of the secret society has cast a shadow over them, and despite their best efforts to move forward, they are constantly reminded of their past. The very foundations of their identities, beliefs, and actions have been shaken, leaving them to face a world that feels colder, more indifferent, and more uncertain. The emotional scars they carry from their involvement in the society are not easily erased, and the trauma they experienced lingers long after the dust has settled. Yet, despite the weight of their past, there exists a possibility, a faint glimmer of hope, that the survivors can carve out new paths for themselves, one that is grounded in the lessons they have learned and the painful truths they have uncovered. This journey of healing is not immediate. It is a slow, often painful process, filled with setbacks and moments of self-doubt. The survivors may feel the weight of their past like an anchor, holding them back and preventing them from moving forward. The collapse of the society has not only stolen their sense of purpose but also their sense of belonging. For so long, they defined themselves by their membership in the society, by the bonds they shared with fellow members, and by the ideals they followed. Now that those bonds have been shattered, they must grapple with the uncertainty of their identity. Who are they now? What do they stand for? And, perhaps most importantly, how do they fit into a world that has moved on without them? These questions swirl in the minds of the survivors as they struggle to navigate the chaos that the collapse has left in its wake. The emotional pain they feel is profound, and it can manifest in many ways. Anxiety, depression, isolation, and an overwhelming sense of disillusionment. They are haunted by the knowledge that the society, which once seemed like a bastion of higher purpose and secret knowledge, was ultimately nothing more than a facade, an elaborate web of lies, deception, and manipulation. The very foundation of their faith in the society has been ripped away, and with it, the meaning they once derived from their involvement. They are left to confront the uncomfortable truth that their participation in the society was, at best, misguided, and at worst, complicit in the harm that it caused. This realization is not easily processed. It is a bitter pill to swallow, one that causes the survivors to question their judgment, their motives, and their own integrity. For some, this confrontation with their own complicity is an opportunity for growth. It forces them to take a hard look at who they were before the collapse and to acknowledge the flaws in their character that allowed them to become so entangled in the society's web. This self-examination is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. It opens the door for personal transformation, for a chance to rebuild their lives based on new, more authentic values. The survivors begin to understand that true power does not come from secrets, manipulation, or control. Instead, it comes from living a life of integrity, honesty, and connection with others. They come to see that their worth is not determined by their position in the society or the power they wielded within it. It is determined by the choices they make, the relationships they build, and the way they contribute to the world around them. However, for others, the emotional weight of their past actions is too much to bear. The guilt and shame they feel are all-consuming, leaving them paralyzed in their efforts to move forward. They struggle to forgive themselves, believing that the damage they caused is irreversible. The memories of betrayal, manipulation, and secrecy continue to haunt them, casting a long shadow over their every thought and action. For these survivors, the path to healing is a slow and arduous one. It may take years, if not decades, for them to come to terms with the consequences of their involvement in the society. And even then, they may never fully reconcile with their past. The scars they bear are deep, and the emotional toll is immense. Yet, even in the face of this immense pain, there remains a flicker of hope. For healing to begin, the survivors must first acknowledge the depth of their trauma, and in doing so, they may begin to uncover the strength that lies buried within them. As they begin to rebuild their lives, the survivors often find themselves questioning the very notion of redemption. Can they truly be redeemed for their involvement in a system that caused so much harm? Is there a way to make up for the wrongs they committed, or are they forever marked by their past? These questions plague them, and there are no easy answers. Redemption is not something that can be easily attained. It is not a simple matter of atoning for their past mistakes and moving on. Instead, it is a complex and ongoing process, one that requires them to live with the consequences of their actions while also striving to be better in the future. It is not about erasing the past but learning to live with it in a way that allows them to create a better future. The journey toward redemption is also marked by a deep sense of alienation. The collapse of the society has left the survivors feeling disconnected not only from the world they once knew but also from themselves. They no longer recognize the people they were before the collapse, and the relationships they once had feel distant and foreign. They are left to navigate a world that no longer makes sense to them, a world that seems to have moved on without them. The trust they once placed in others has been shattered, and the survivors often find themselves struggling to form new connections. Every relationship feels fraught with the potential for betrayal, and every interaction is colored by the knowledge that they have been deceived before. This deep sense of alienation can make it difficult for them to find peace, as they feel like outsiders in a world that no longer understands them. But even in the midst of this alienation, there is a spark of hope. The survivors begin to realize that their journey is not about returning to the past. It is about finding a new way forward. The collapse of the society has opened their eyes to the limitations of the world they once inhabited, and they begin to see the possibility of creating something new. They can no longer rely on the society to define who they are or give them purpose. They must create their own path based on their own values, their own sense of identity, and their own understanding of the world. This is not an easy task, and the road ahead is fraught with obstacles. But for many survivors, it is the only path that offers the possibility of redemption. In the process of rebuilding their lives, the survivors begin to understand that their true strength lies not in their ability to control others or hide behind secrecy, but in their capacity for vulnerability and honesty. They must learn to open themselves up to the world around them, to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect, and to live lives that are grounded in truth. This is the only way they can begin to heal, both from the emotional scars of their past and from the alienation they feel in the present. They must learn that true power comes not from manipulating the world around them, but from living with integrity, facing their fears, and being true to themselves. As time passes, the survivors begin to realize that the collapse of the society was not an end, but a beginning. It forced them to confront the darkest parts of themselves and the world around them. It shattered the illusions they had once clung to and revealed the harsh truth that the world is not always as it seems. But in the process, it also opened the door to transformation. They are no longer defined by the society or the lies it propagated. They are defined by the choices they make, the relationships they build, and the way they choose to move forward in a world that has been forever altered. While the scars of their past may never fully fade, the survivors begin to understand that they have the power to shape their own destinies. They can no longer rely on external forces to define their lives. They must take responsibility for their past, but they must also take control of their future. The collapse of the society was a painful, disorienting experience, but it has also given them the opportunity to create new lives for themselves, lives that are not bound by the secrets of the past, but grounded in the possibilities of the future. For many, the path forward is one of redemption, not because they can erase the past, but because they can choose to live differently, to live more authentically, and to live with a sense of integrity that was once absent from their lives. The collapse of the society may have been the catalyst for their transformation, but it is not the defining moment of their lives. They are more than the mistakes they made, more than the lies they told, and more than the secrets they kept. They are human, capable of growth, change, and renewal. The collapse may have broken them, but it also gave them the opportunity to rebuild themselves stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the world around them. They now have the chance to create a future that is their own, one that is not defined by the past but shaped by the choices they make moving forward. In the aftermath of the society's collapse, the survivors begin to see the fractures in the world around them more clearly than ever before. What they once believed to be a well-ordered and controlled system is now revealed as a fragile construct, built on the same principles of manipulation and self-interest that had governed the secret society. They are forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that the collapse was not just an isolated event. It was a reflection of deeper societal flaws, a microcosm of the corruption and power struggles that exist within every layer of human interaction. In a sense, the collapse serves as a mirror, showing them the rot that lies beneath the surface of the world they had once been part of, forcing them to reckon with the idea that perhaps the very systems they had once fought to uphold were inherently flawed. The survivors, in their quest to rebuild their lives, realized that the ideals they had adhered to for so long, the ideals that had defined their membership in the society, are not as unique or isolated as they once thought. The thirst for power, control, and influence that had driven them to join the society exists in many forms across society, whether in politics, business, or even personal relationships. It is a universal human impulse, one that transcends any specific group or ideology. This realization shakes them to the core, as they are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that the world is not as moral, as righteous, or as controlled as they had once believed. The idea of a higher purpose, of a guiding force that would lead them to the truth, now seems naive. They realize that the forces at play in the world are far more complex, far more chaotic, and far more ruthless than they could have ever imagined. This disillusionment is compounded by the fact that they can no longer trust the structures they had once relied on for guidance. The collapse of the secret society was, in many ways, a loss of faith, not only in the society itself but in the institutions that govern the world at large. They begin to see that those in power are often no different from the corrupt leaders of the society they had once been part of. The political systems, the corporations, the religious institutions, these are all built on the same principles of manipulation, self-interest, and control. In many ways, the survivors come to understand that the society's collapse was not an anomaly but a reflection of the larger systemic issues that plague the world. The secrecy, the lies, the deception, they are not isolated to one organization, but are present throughout society, embedded in the very fabric of human existence.